Art can heal PTSD's invisible wounds. You're a high ranking military service member deployed to Afghanistan. You're responsible for lives of hundreds of men and women, and your base is under attack. Incoming mortar rounds are exploding all around you. Struggling to see through the dust and the smoke, you do your best to assist the wounded and then crawl to the nearby bunker. Conscious but dazed by the blast, you lay on your side and attempt to process what has just happened. As you regain your vision, you see the bloody face staring back at you. The image is terrifying, but you quickly come to understand it's not real. This vision continues to visit you multiple times a day and in your sleep. You chose not to tell anyone for fear of losing your job or being seen as weak. You give the vision a name, bloody face and bunker, and call it BFib for short. You keep BFib locked away in your mind, secretly haunting you for the next 7 years. Now close your eyes. Can you see BFib? If you can, you're beginning to see the face of the invisible wounds of war, commonly known as post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. While I can't say I have post-traumatic stress disorder, I've never been a stranger to it. When I was a little girl, I would visit my grandparents every summer. I was a It was my grandfather who introduced me to effects of combat on the psyche. While my grandfather was serving as a Marine in the Korean War, a bullet pierced his neck and rendered him unable to cry out. He watched as a corpsman passed him over, declaring him a gunner, and then leaving him to die. Years later, after his physical wounds had healed and he returned home, he rarely spoke of his experiences in waking life. But at night, I would hear him shouting obscenities from his room down the hall. And during the day, I would announce myself as I entered the room, careful not to startle or agitate him. He lived out the remainder of his life isolated and tight-lipped, never finding a way to express himself, and I didn't yet have the tools to guide him. I wouldn't have a name for my grandfather's condition until I was in my 20s. Seeking a graduate degree in art therapy, I naturally gravitated towards the study of trauma. And while sitting in class learning about post traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD for short, my mission to help service members who suffered like my grandfather began to take form. We've had various names for post traumatic stress throughout the history of war: homesickness, soldier's heart, shell shock, thousand-yard stare, or for instance. And while I was pursuing my degree, a new war was raging, and thanks to modern body armor and military vehicles, service members were surviving blast injuries they wouldn't have before. But the invisible wounds were reaching new levels, and this pushed military doctors and researchers to try and truly understand the effects that traumatic brain injury, or TBI, and PTSD have on the brain. Due to advanced in technology and neuroimaging, we now how there's an actual shutdown in the Broca's, or the speech language area of the brain, after an individual experiences trauma. This psychological change, or speechless terror, as it's often called, coupled with mental health stigma, the fear of being judged and misunderstood, possibly even removed from their current duties, has led to the invisible struggles of our servicemen and women. Generation after generation of veterans have chosen not to talk about their experiences and suffer in solitude. I had my work cut out for me when I got my first job as an art therapist, at the nation's largest military medical center, Walter Lee Reed. After working for a few years on a locked-in patient psychiatric unit, I eventually transferred to the National Intrepid Center of Excellence, NICOE, which lead TBI care for active duty service members. Now, I believed in art therapy, but I was going to have to convince service members, big, tough, strong, manly military men, and some women too, to give art making as a therapeutic intervention a try. The results have been nothing short and spectacular. Vivid symbolic artwork is being created by our servicemen and women, and every work of art tells a story. We've observed that the process of art therapy bypasses the speech language issue with the brain. Art making accesses the same sensory areas of brain that encode trauma. Service members can use the art making to work through their experiences in a non-threatening way. They can then apply words to their physical creations, reintegrating the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. Now, we've seen this can work with all forms of art, drawing, painting, collage, but what seems to have the most impact is mask making. Finally, these invisible wounds don't just have a name, they have a face. And when service members create these masks, uh, it allows them to come to grips, literally, with their trauma. And it's amazing how often that it enables them to break through the trauma and start to heal. Remember BFib? That was a real experience of one of my patients. And when he created his mask, he was able to let go of that haunting image. Initially, it was daunting process for the service member, but eventually he began to think of BFib as a mask, not his internal wound, and he would go to leave each session. He would hand me the mask and say, Melissa, take care of him. Eventually, we placed BFib in a box to further contain him. And when the service member went to leave the NICO, he chose to leave BFib behind. A year later, he had only seen BFib twice, and both times BFib was smiling and the service member didn't feel anxious. Now, whenever the service member is haunted by some traumatic memory, he continues to paint. Every time he paints these disturbing images, he sees them less or not at all. Philosophers have told us for thousands of years that power to create is very closely linked to the power to destroy. Now, science is showing us that the part of the brain that registers a traumatic wound can be the part of the brain where healing happens too. And art therapy is showing us how to make that connection. We asked one of our service members to describe how mask making impacted his treatment, and this is what he had to say. Video. Service member. You sort of just zone out into the mask. You zone out into the drawing, and for me, it just released the block. So I was able to do it. And then when I looked at it after 2 days, I was like, holy crap, here's the picture, here's the key, here's the puzzle. And then from there, it just soared. I mean, from there, my treatment just went just went out of a sight because they were like, Kurt, explain this. And for the first time in 23 years, I could actually talk about the stuff openly too, like anybody. I could talk to you about it right now if I wanted to, because it unlocked it. It's just amazing. And it allowed me to put 23 years of PTSD and TBI stuff together in one place that has never happened before. Sorry. Over the past 5 years, we've had over 1,000 masks made. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Thank you. I wish I could have shared this process with my grandfather, but I know that he would be thrilled that we were finding ways to help today's and tomorrow's service members heal and finding the resources within them that they can call upon to heal themselves. Thank you. Art can heal PTSD's indivisible wounds를 읽고 요즘은 누구나 정도의 차이는 있지만 PTSD를 안고 살아가는 것 같다. 물론 아무 충격이나 이 이름을 붙일 수 있는 것은 아닐 것이다. 심리학을 공부하고 또 관심 있는 사람으로서 또한 PTSD를 가지고 있을 수도 있는 미군 베테랑 2명과 같이 일하고 있는 나로서는 그들에게 어떤 증상이 있는지 개인적으로 궁금하기도 하고 그들에게는 미안하기도 하지만 어쩌면 파내려고 하는지도 모르겠다. 대화를 하면서 자연스럽게 뭔가 나오지 않을까 하는 분석적인 마인드를 가지고 편하게 대화를 한다. 대화 시간이 길지는 않다. 같은 업무를 하는 건 아니라서. 내가 겪어보지 않은 경험들, 간접적으로 아무리 들어봐도 백문이 불여일견인 것처럼 직접 겪어보지 않으면 다른 사람들의 경험과 생각을 절대로 100% 이해할 수는 없다. 그들이 나의 생각과 경험을 100% 이해할 수 없는 것처럼 말이다. 어쩌면 너무나도 당연한, 하지만 어쩌면 제일 하기 힘든, 잘 들어주기가 제일 좋은 해법일지도 모른다. 하지만 나와 관련도 없고 관심도 없는 일에 대해서 들어주는 것이 얼마나 고된 일인지 PTSD까지 가지 않아도 주변에 말이 많은 사람이 한 명이라도 있다면 잘 알 것이다. 주변에 마음의 병으로 아파하는 사람이 있는가? 고등학교 때부터 미국에서 거주를 하였고 대학을 졸업한 지 13년 만에 큰 결심을 가지고 심리학으로 대학원을 가게 된 것은 나의 의지였지만 박사학위는 나의 엄마를 위해서 해야겠다. 아니 대학원은 이리저리 야매로 했지만 박사만은 제대로 해서 엄마를 치유해주고 싶다는 생각에 이 고생문을 또 들어가야 하나 마나에 기로에 갈린 요즘. 이런 마음을 먹게 해준 장본인은 바로 엄마다. 나 자신의 마음을 잘 돌보고 싶은 생각도 있지만, 또 다른 이유. 주 공무원 사이콜로지스트가 돼서 연봉을 올려서 은퇴연금을 두둑히 불리려는 이유도 있다. 엄마, 동기부여이자 동시에 압박의 존재. 좋은 건가? 전쟁이나 엄청난 충격을 겪은 것도 아닌 사람이 가정 환경만으로도 이렇게 힘들어할 수 있다는 것을 처음 알았다. 남의 이야기는 들어본 적이 있지만, 참 안 됐다. 그냥 이 정도였던 것 같다. 엄마라서 더 연민과 공감이 가는 듯하다. 철저히 계획된 무남동녀 외동딸로 부모에게서도 친척들에게서도 이쁨과 사랑만을 받아온 나로서는 이해를 하려고 해도 도저히 할 수 없는 영역이다. 오늘은 여기까지입니다. 다음에 더 흥미로운 테드토크로 돌아오도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. These days, it feels like almost everyone is living with some degree of PTSD, although we can't label just any shock or trauma with this term. As someone who studies and is interested in psychology, and as someone working with 2 US military veterans who may be dealing with PTSD, I find myself personally curious about the symptoms they might be experiencing. I feel a bit guilty, but part of me might even be trying to dig into it. When we talk, I approach the conversation analytically, wondering if something will naturally come up. Our conversations aren't long since we don't work on the same tasks. No matter how much we try to understand other people's experiences, nothing beats living through something yourself. You can never fully grasp another person's thoughts or experiences, just as they can fully understand yours. This seems obvious, but is possibly the hardest truth to accept. Maybe the best solution is simply listening, which is probably one of the hardest things to do well. Listening is something you're not involved in or particularly interested in can be exhausting. Anyone who's had a talkative person in their life knows this well, even without dealing with PTSD. Do you know anyone who's suffering from emotional pain? Since high school, I've lived in the US, and now 13 years after my bachelor's degree, I decided to go for a master's degree and finished in July 2024. Though it's my choice to pursue this field, I now find myself at the crossroads deciding whether or not to endure the hardship of pursuing PhD. My motivation? I want to help my mom. I may have taken shortcuts with my master's degree, but I want to get my PhD properly so I can heal her. Of course, I also want to take care of my own mental health, but there's another reason too. I want to become a state government psychologist, raise my salary, and build up a solid retirement fund. My mom, she's both my motivation and a source of pressure. Is that a good thing? It's surprising to learn that even someone who hasn't been through war or extreme trauma can suffer so much just from their domestic environment. I had heard stories of others before, but my reaction was more like, oh, that's unfortunate. But with my mom, I feel more empathy and compassion. Maybe it's because she's my mother. As an only child, planned and cherished by both my parents and extended family, I cannot fully understand their pain, but I'm trying. That is all for today. I'll be back next time with more interesting TED Talk. Thank you.